Minerals. The purpose of this video is start talking about minerals, figure out what they do in our body, and why they can be so important and so detrimental if you don't get enough. Let's start with the overview of the minerals. Now, just like vitamins, minerals are considered micronutrients. That means you need smaller amounts. But while the vitamins were the organic side of things, your minerals are the inorganic side that we're focusing on. There's really two main categories of minerals. We'll look at the major minerals, which we'll talk about in this video, and we'll look at the trace minerals. The biggest difference here is how much you need. Major minerals need more, makes sense. Trace minerals are much smaller amounts. The idea is those major minerals, they're things like sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, and even sulfur. And to be in the major mineral category, you're looking at 100 milligrams a day or more. So it's, again, continuous. You have to have this per day. It's not you have a whole lot the first day and it builds up. No, every day you must consume these minerals. Now those trace minerals, things like zinc, iron, copper, you need in smaller quantities, but still on a daily basis. Now the catch here is, the minerals are not as efficiently absorbed as the vitamins were. So that means it makes it a little more difficult to get those minerals absorbed into our GI tract so we can have them inside our body. And some sources that have the minerals are a very poor source because of other compounds found. For example, your plant sources sometimes have phytates and oxalates. Now, these are going to actually impede the absorption of the minerals. So it really is important to figure out what the source is and what's also found in that source at the same time. Plus, sometimes you have other vitamins that help with mineral absorption. For example, vitamin C is going to help with the uptake of iron. Vitamin D helps with absorption of calcium. So having the vitamins with the minerals can be beneficial as well. Let's start with calcium. Now I know we mentioned sodium, potassium, chloride. Those were discussed in a previous video, so we're kind of skipping over those. Going right into calcium. Calcium is the most abundant mineral in your body because calcium is found throughout your bones, it's in your teeth, it's found throughout your blood as well. Now, calcium, besides thinking strengthen bones, well, what else does it do? Well, just a few things. For example, nerve transmission. If you like having your nerves actually functioning, you need calcium. Muscle contraction. Think heart and all the muscles of your arms and legs. Every muscle needs calcium for contraction. Blood clotting. Calcium is needed in the cascade to allow clotting to occur. And of course, it's in your bones, in your teeth. Helps provide some of the strength and the mineralization that's in those bones. Your bones basically store about 65% of the calcium in your body. So that's the majority, but obviously there's a lot left that's in the nervous system, in the muscular system, in the cardiovascular system. So the way your body works is if you need extra calcium in your blood, your bones are what will provide that calcium. What happens is the calcium is pulled out of the bones and put into the bloodstream. That bloodstream then will have an elevated calcium level back to where it should be. It can go to any of the systems that need calcium. The problem? That's bone resorption. You're removing the calcium, which could weaken the bones if you don't replace it. And that can lead to, ultimately, osteoporosis if you keep weakening and weakening and weakening. So the way your body maintains this, it maintains a homeostasis, a balance, is the hormones parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. Now, parathyroid hormone and calcitonin are both going to work in opposite ways. If you have too much calcium in your blood, calcitonin will then help to deposit calcium from the blood into the bones, building up your reserve of calcium. That kind of also helps with vitamin D for the absorption purpose there. But more importantly, absorption of vitamin D and calcium need to happen when you're low levels of calcium. So if you have low levels of blood calcium, that's parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone is going to stimulate that bone resorption. It actually stimulates these cells called osteoclast cells to break down the bone and release calcium into your blood. You increase vitamin D functionality and have more absorption coming in from the small intestines. Even your kidneys play a part by trying to reabsorb more calcium so it's not being lost. The idea is you're trying to make sure you elevate that blood calcium. All right, so what are some other benefits of calcium? We've gone through a lot already, but they're looking at a possible link right now with the ability to reduce certain chances of cancers. It's a constant research, so it's not conclusive yet, but they're leaning towards it might be something that's helping out there. Also, adequate levels of calcium can help to reduce the chances of kidney stones. But be careful, too much calcium will actually increase the chances of kidney stones. So there's that fine line, make sure you're at the recommended allowance without being too much or too little. So where is calcium coming from? Well, there's plenty of supplements out there and plenty in your natural diet. One of the big things to watch out for is if you're going the supplement route. A lot they found of the different supplements that are calcium-based supplements actually have a surprising amount of lead in them. Because the sources of calcium, things like dolomite, a mineral, or crushed oyster shell, those sources can have higher amounts of lead based on how they're structurally built. So it's always best to get it from your diet, but if you're doing it from supplements, just be careful which ones you're using. Make sure you do your research and look into that a little bit. Now, chelated is still supplement-based, so it's not diet yet. We'll get that in 1 second. But chelated is a little bit better for you than the regular supplements. They're not sure exactly how much better, so is it really worth it? They're debatable. But the chelation process is going to help to protect the chelated calcium from the oxalates and the phytates in your small intestines. That way it can help with more absorption. So in this case, it's still helpful, but again, diet is still the best. But you're saying, well, maybe I'm lactose intolerant, I can't get enough. Then that's fine. You're going to the different sources of the actual supplements. But just do a little research, look into them, see what the background is, see what their levels are. But make sure you're doing that with vitamin D, because vitamin D helps calcium absorption. If you're simply just taking calcium with no vitamin D, it's passing right through majority. It's not being as beneficial as it could be. But again, watch about overconsumption. So knowing what you should take, how much you do ingest, and therefore what your levels should be. Because overconsumption of calcium, especially from supplements, I already mentioned the possibility of kidney stones, but they're also looking at a possibility of a link to increasing chances of certain cancers. All right, so we mentioned dairy, milk, cheese, yogurt. It's also fortified into certain other things, certain cereals, orange juices, things like that. Or looking at kale, for example, can have calcium in it. But how much do you really need on a daily basis? Looking at about 200 milligrams infancy, up to about 1,300 milligrams for a teen. That drops a little bit for adulthood, down to about 1,000 milligrams, until you reach about 50, and then it goes up to 1,200 milligrams. Because by that point, they're trying to make sure there's enough calcium to keep the bones as strong as possible. So we have calcium in the diet, calcium supplements, regular or chelated. But again, diet is the best. So think about where it's coming from, how much do you need, and make sure you're not going over the top too much. Next one up is phosphorus. Phosphorus is the second most abundant in your body. But the interesting thing is, it can't exist as phosphorus itself. It exists as phosphate, because phosphorus itself is actually very problematic. So the raw form just can't work. So we have what's called phosphate in our body. Now phosphate, you may remember back from previous videos, phosphate's the backbone of DNA, RNA, is part of ATP. The energy source has the 3 phosphate groups. It's also a calcium phosphate complex in your bones. So it's being deposited in the bones. So we're looking again, parathyroid hormone, or PTH, helps regulate calcium. We know that was helping to pull calcium out of the bones into the blood. But it also helps to regulate phosphate. What ends up happening is it's going to stimulate the kidneys to excrete phosphate so it doesn't build up to unhealthy levels in your blood. So just like calcium, phosphate is dependent on parathyroid hormone. So where do you get this phosphate? Salmon, yogurt, various dairy sources, even meats. The amount you need on a daily basis again, about 100 milligrams from infancy, up to about 1,250 for teens, and then it drops down to about 700 milligrams for adults. Now, if you notice, the calcium and phosphate both elevated for teens. Why? The increase in growth, the increase in bone density is occurring then. So making sure there's enough to have strong, healthy bones as the teens are growing and increasing in body size. All right, calcium, phosphorus. Next up is sulfur. Yes, you actually need sulfur in your body in certain quantities. Now, sulfur is found almost exclusively in proteins. It is found in methionine as well as cysteine, so the 2 sulfur-based proteins. You can also use sulfur as an antioxidant enzyme that helps with glutathione peroxidase. So glutathione peroxidase, antioxidant, think helping vitamin E, so it helps to kind of alleviate some of that vitamin E activity. That's based on sulfur. Now the interesting thing is there's no set recommendation for how much sulfur to have in a day. Because basically, if you're having an adequate amount of protein, you're covering the sulfur needs. Which then is an interesting thing because if someone's a true vegan, not vegetarian, vegan. So no meat, no animal products. Then you have to pay attention to where you're getting a protein source and how you're getting your dietary sulfur. So while a vegan diet can be very healthy, there takes some planning in there to make sure you're not missing out on any certain minerals or vitamins or the components due to not eating any meat products. Can still definitely be done, no problem, but you gotta think about it. Just pay a little more attention to it. Because where do you get most of your sulfur? I said protein. So we're looking at meats, fish, poultry. You can get them from cruciferous vegetables as well. Sulfur, kind of important because you're looking at those 2 various amino acids there, methionine and cysteine. Next up, magnesium. Now, magnesium, again, is mostly in your bones. Give or take about 60% is found in your bones. But the interesting part here, only about 1% of the mineralization of your bones is actually magnesium. That's telling you, okay, there's a lot more calcium, a lot more phosphate in the bones than there is magnesium. Magnesium is actually found on the surface of the bones. And by being on the surface, it's not really the main structural component in the bones. It's covering the surface, helping to maximize the structure and keep the bones at their maximum ability. But that's also why deficiencies in magnesium can actually cause osteoporosis. Because again, it's helping with that overall bone health. So you have a decreased parathyroid hormone and a decrease in activation of vitamin D. Well, that impairs the remodeling, so you can't remodel and remake the bones, which is something you do throughout your life. Your bones are constantly remodeling to match the stresses you apply to them. So if you can't efficiently remodel, the bones might not be strong enough, hence the osteoporotic issues. So magnesium, again, just like calcium, just like phosphate, important for the bones. But what's even more interesting is practically every interaction of ATP is using magnesium as a cofactor. You use ATP all over the place in your body, which means you use a lot of magnesium as a cofactor there. It really works in more than 300 different enzymatic reactions. Synthetic reactions, the ones that are making and synthesizing lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids. Pretty much those major molecules you have in your body are all based off of magnesium as a cofactor in the synthesis process. ATP metabolism needs magnesium. Looking at muscle contractions needs magnesium. Your neurological function, simply thinking, needs magnesium. So getting the idea that magnesium, we don't need a ton of it, is still pretty important to make sure you have on a daily basis. The problem is, it's believed that the majority of Americans have at least a slight deficiency, if not a large deficiency, in magnesium. So it's something that maybe might be something to focus on the diets. So, hey, make sure we have enough of this to help support all of our body functions. So where do you get it from? Things like nuts, black beans have it, yogurt, salmon, chicken. Leafy greens will have it because magnesium is a main part of chlorophyll. So how much do you need? Your RDA starts about 30 milligrams for infants, and it ramps up to about 420 milligrams in adults. So it's a bit of an increase there, but still milligrams. It's not a ton, hence why it's a micronutrient. All right, so those are the major minerals in our bodies. Remember, sodium, potassium, and chloride are also major minerals. We covered those in a previous video, so if you want to take a look, head back into that to look at the electrolytes where that video is located. Until the next video.